Thank you, Stephanie, and hello to everyone that's attending the webinar today. I'm really excited that you are here, so thank you for attending. And today I just want to share some experiences that I've had with rubrics with ExamSoft, and we're actually going to take a peek into the rubrics portal so you can see what that looks like, and just share some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way with using this program. So just to tell you a little bit more about me, again, I'm a clinical pharmacist. So I work here at the University Hospital, but I also teach. So for 50% of my time, I'm in the classroom with the students. And I absolutely love this because I like to try new and innovative teaching methods to help that learning stick better. And one of the ways that I do this is using rubrics, because I truly believe that using rubrics is actually an innovative teaching method that we can use so that students retain information better. So these are some pictures just from some of the innovative teaching methods that I use. I use team-based learning and also simulation with an interprofessional team. But I think that rubrics is just as innovative and just a fun way of teaching as some of these methods are. So just to give you an overview of what my learning outcomes would be for you today is that we're first going to explain the value of assessment. Again, this is as a teaching method. We usually think of assessment as just something we do after teaching, but I think that using rubrics as a form of assessment can actually be a teaching method for our students. And then secondly, we'll compare some to-do and not to-do items when you are considering creating peer grading assignments, especially for the first time. And then lastly, I want you to be making a list and be creative and start thinking about some assignments, maybe in your course or in your program, that could utilize peer grading. Because even though I'm teaching in pharmacy, I believe that this is applicable to all professions, so it doesn't matter what you're teaching in. I feel like using rubrics as a teaching method could be beneficial to you. So again, is this even possible? Because I'm sure I have some skeptics of, I don't really think that assessment can be a teaching method, but I hope that in these next few slides I'm going to convince you that by using rubrics you're actually teaching students lots of great skills and attitudes that we want them to carry forward into their careers. So I do believe that assessment can be a teaching method. So just for some terminology, what is this peer grading that we're talking about? Really, it's just grading learners by other learners. So that can be termed peer grading, peer evaluation, peer assessment. It's all the same things. You've got learners that are assessing and evaluating or grading other learners. So I'm going to use these terms interchangeably, but this is what we're talking about when I'm talking about peer grading or peer assessment. So why should we use peer grading as a form of teaching? And honestly, there's a lot of basis in learning theory. So when we look back at Vygotsky and Piaget and Cross, some of these founders, when we think about learning theory, you can see that peer grading is a part of that in their works. And so using peer grading as teaching is really an innovative form. Now, it is an innovative form of assessment. And for those assessment people who are out there, I'm also the director of assessment for our college, and rubrics can really give us some valuable information on assessment methods that are not easily captured with multiple choice type questions. So we can grade presentations and student thought processes and assignments that we might not be able to grade or test those skills just with the multiple choice type question. So rubrics is definitely an innovative form of assessment, but also believe that it's an innovative form of teaching. And here's some of the reasons. I'm going to give you 8 reasons why I believe that using peer evaluations is valuable for teaching and not just as an assessment method. So first of all, it's going to engage students in the material at a deeper level, because if they are forced to look at someone else's material, their works, and really dig into it and figure out, did they meet this requirement? Did they not? Did they explain that at a deep enough level? They're going to really have to split hairs and go into the nuances of that content that they've learned in order to evaluate someone else's work. So we're forcing them to dig in at a deeper level, and this is really going to promote some higher order thinking skills. So analysis, evaluation, all of those things that are at the top of Bloom's taxonomy, we want to promote those in our students, and peer evaluations can do that for us. Secondly, when we involve students in the evaluation, in the assessment process, it really encourages learner autonomy. So they feel like they have a role in it, and they have a role that they can play in learning and helping other students to learn. So this will really empower them to take control of their own learning. And we know that learning autonomy and the students really feeling that sense of control is going to help them learn. So it's really important that rubrics can help us do that. Thirdly, using peer evaluations for teaching teaches students how to assess. And when they're learning how to assess, that's really where we have that application of the content knowledge, because again, they're digging deeper into the material, and so it's forcing them to apply just those facts that they've learned. So teaching them how to assess is really important. And also, this gives them an appreciation for assessment. So when they see the back end of things and they see what goes into evaluating another person's work, it's going to create an appreciation for them, for your teachers, but also for assessment in general. So I believe that that is a win. And then fourthly, it's going to enhance learning through this knowledge diffusion. I say knowledge diffusion because students are exchanging their ideas and their views when they're reading other students' work. They're actually teaching each other. So they're learning from each other as they're reading a work from another student's perspective. So this knowledge that diffuses between them is really, really important and a great benefit of using peer evaluations for teaching. Fifth here is, if you're using peer evaluations, it's going to clarify the criteria for that assessment. So whatever assignment you're giving them, they already know what is required of them because you've given them the rubric and they know how they will be assessed. So that is automatically going to improve the quality of their work because they already know what they're going for. You've set the standard for them of what you want them to accomplish, and now they just have to meet that expectation. So you're going to get higher quality of work. Six, it's going to facilitate metacognition, and metacognition is just a fancy word for thinking about thinking. It's actually making them self-assess and look at their own work to regulate their own learning and to see what they know versus what they don't know. So they're going to compare their work to the rubric as well, so it's going to help them already start thinking about how they can become better. Now this will lead to number 7 here, which is promoting lifelong learning, which we want in all of our students. We want them to take the concepts and the processes that we're teaching them in school, but then apply that to different areas once they get out of our classrooms. So this idea of continually learning and continuing to improve and get feedback is going to be a result of using peer evaluations, because students are going to see the value in receiving feedback from others in order to make themselves better. And then the last thing I have here is number 8, and using peer evaluations is really practice for their future careers, because it really doesn't matter what type of job they're going into. Most likely they're going to be evaluating other people at some point. And so go ahead and getting them into the practice of evaluating work and then creating feedback is going to be really beneficial to them as they go further into their careers and enter the workforce. So I've presented about 8 things here for you of what I see are some of the benefits of using peer evaluation for teaching and not just for assessment. So I've created a poll, and Stephanie's going to go ahead and open this up. I'm curious, out of those items, which one of those do you feel like is the most important, or what is the greatest advantage of those that are mentioned? And I could only put in 5 on the question, so I tried to condense some. But which of those do you see as being most important and the greatest advantage to using peer evaluations for teaching? So I'll give you just a few seconds to enter your choice there. And there actually might be some other items that I haven't thought of, so I'd love for you to add those into the chat box that is located on the right-hand panel on the bottom. If you can think of another advantage to using peer evaluations for teaching, please feel free to add those in on the chat box. We'll give you just a few more seconds to enter your answer for the poll.
Okay, we've got almost everybody has put in their votes, Ashley, and looks like we're sitting at overwhelmingly the option of 54% engage students at a deeper level and 27% at teach students how to assess.
Excellent, great. I totally agree with those. I'm glad that you see those as well. So I think there's some really great advantages to using peer evaluations for teaching. So I hope that you can already see and answer this question that your students could benefit from peer assessment. So that's all great and good, but now the next question is, well, how do we do that easily? How do we get those 8 benefits that we talked about? How do we make that happen with our tight schedules? Because I know everyone is pretty cramped for time. So the answer that I believe to this question is with rubrics, and using ExamSoft Rubrics we can get at those 8 items, and especially with engaging the students at a deeper level using rubrics. I'm sorry, that keeps transferring back. Let's try that again. Okay, so what is a rubric? It is just a predetermined set of goals and objectives on which you base an evaluation. And honestly, you can make a rubric for almost anything, but the keys there that it's predetermined, so you come up with that, or you even help students or get students to help you come up with rubrics. And then these are the goals and objectives. What do you want them to actually learn from this assignment that they're doing for you? So I want to get your creative juices flowing and show you some examples of how we use rubrics here at our College of Pharmacy. And I want you to already be thinking, what are some things, maybe they're similar in this list, but some other ideas that you might be able to use in your course or in your program. So first of all, and this is probably the most common use of rubrics, is with oral presentations. So you want to evaluate what the students are doing and how they're giving their presentations, but you want that to be in a standardized way, and that's how rubrics can really help you. So when it comes to oral presentations, you might be looking at their content. We use it to look at their knowledge of drugs or knowledge of disease states, and how well they can develop a plan to then take care of that patient. But we're also looking at some presentation skills. Were they comfortable? Did they answer questions well? Did they seem confident in their responses? So we use rubrics a lot to evaluate oral presentations in the college. Secondly is we have a resume or a CV assignment where we have the students peer grade each other to make sure that all of the elements of their CV look good and that everything looks organized and that all those grammatical errors have been caught, because the more eyes you can have looking at your CV, the better. So students really seem to see the value in this, and they enjoy having other people looking at their CV so that they can get that feedback and make those changes. Going back just to some examples, we talked about oral presentations and even the use of assignments like students peer reviewing their CV or resumes with each other. Our students have really seen the value in that because they enjoy getting that feedback from other students on their CV. The third assignment that I have here is creating a protocol. So for us, this would be a protocol of using medications and changing doses with a physician-based protocol, but this might be something different in whatever profession you're teaching in. But any type of assignment that you want to grade them on, maybe it's a single student assignment or even group work, but whatever it is, that they turn in an artifact, they turn in a document, and then you have a rubric that's predefined that can then assess their work. Fourth here, I have our grading essay questions. So we use some essay questions on our exams here in the college, and rubrics is a great way to standardize how we are grading those assessments so that students are all getting the same type of feedback and are being held accountable for the same things. And then journal clubs. This is something I know that's done a lot in health professions, but probably in other professions as well, is that you would have students give an oral presentation based on an article that they've read in a current journal for the field. And you might want to assess things like how well they interpreted the tables or the data that's presented and how well they draw conclusions on that data. And again, you patient skills here as well. But journal clubs would be a great way that you can use rubrics to assess student performance. And lastly here, this is tied to health professions, but if you have the students do an assignment where they're taking care of a patient and they need to write up their recommendations for how they would treat and monitor that patient's therapy, then this is a great way for them to write that down just as they would in a electronic medical record and then grade that according to a rubric. So again, these are just a few examples, but I hope that they maybe spur your thinking and your creativity on some assignments that you're probably already doing, but that you could use rubrics to give students feedback and standardize your assessment of those assignments. So I mentioned to you that I want you to see what it looks like inside the portal in case there are some people here who have not activated the rubric side of their portal, that you would be able to see what that looks like and see how easy it is to use these. So we're going to create a rubric. This is just your heads up. We're going to be using cookies as our topic since that's something I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with. So that more to come there. But next, I just want to give you a couple of tips just as we're getting started before we go into the portal. So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you're creating a rubric is think, what are those critical items of the assignment that you're wanting to assess? So maybe it is presentation skills or knowledge of a drug or disease state, but those would become your rows. Those are the things that we are looking to assess. And then you're going to create your evaluation range. So those are columns, or within ExamSoft they call these levels, but those are the different levels that we would assign the student's work to. So these can be things all the way from exceeds expectations down to did not meet expectations, and any level in between. Or maybe your highest level is great work, and then your lowest level was that it was a poor performance. Whatever those levels are, I would recommend that you keep that to 3 to 5 levels. Research is going to show that if you have more than that, it gets hard to really separate where performance falls, but somewhere between 3 and 5 levels would be a good place to make for this evaluation range. And then your next step is going to be to carefully write descriptors for each one of those levels. And the best tip that I can give you here is to go ahead and write your best level. So your awesome, exceeds expectation. You go ahead and write your description of that, and then you just change little pieces of that wording to go down in your evaluation range. So I'll show you an example of what that might look like once we get into the portal. But you have to have those really good descriptors for each level so that the people who are grading, which might not always be you, but the people who are grading will all know what each level means. Next, as you're getting started, you need to think about, do you want to assign points to each one of those levels, or do you want to use a scale range? And the difference in that would be, if you do points, that would be if that level is chosen, that's the set of points that is assigned. But if you wanted to give your grader a little bit more leeway within each one of those levels, you could say, okay, for the exceeds expectation, you can assign anywhere between 7 and 10 points, because there might be some variation of answer choices within that. And then you let the grader actually decide which part of that range that they would like to go toward. We'll look at that within the portal as well. And then you also consider, maybe there's some items that you want to weight more heavily. So maybe they're giving a presentation and you want to assess their presentation skills, but that's not the main thing you want to look at. You want to look at their actual knowledge of what they're talking about. So you could weight that higher and keep your presentation skills lower, just depending on what you're wanting to assess. And then also with your rubrics, you need to think about using them and even revising them before you use them with the entire class. So of course you need to use it yourself. Maybe you do it, maybe you're using an artifact like the CV assignment and you are wanting to make sure that the rubric is covering everything that you want it to. You could test it out with someone else's CV and see if it works. Make sure you're getting everything that should be captured. And then ask a colleague to look at it as well. Make sure that you haven't missed something. And then I think this is a great tip. Go ahead and let students use the rubric and see if there's anything else that maybe you were missing, because they'll catch stuff that we haven't thought about. So I would do all of that with a small group of people before you actually use it with an entire class to evaluate a work. So those are just some little tips on how to get started with using the rubrics. So this is where I want to actually go inside the portal and let's create a rubric together. So I'm switching over now to the portal, and we've set up just a fake portal for us. So you'll see that this second tab up here for rubrics is open, and now we're able to add rubrics. So if you just click Create a New Rubric, let's go ahead and title it. Again, we're looking at cookies, so how about we name this rubric The Yummiest Cookie. And then you'll put it in a folder. I'm going to leave it in my webinar folder. And then you can give a quick description of what your rubric is. So a rubric to evaluate the best chocolate chip cookie, because we're going to stick to chocolate chip here. So that's it. We've done our titles, and then we need to decide how many rows we're going to use, and we'll just see how it goes. But I'm going to start off with just 8 dimensions, 8 different things that we'll look at. And then again here with your columns, this is where you want to have 3 to 5 evaluation levels. So I'm going to start with 3 here. We can always add more if we change our mind later. This is just to get started. And then here's where we consider if we want to actually use points or if we want to use that scale range. So for points, if I choose it, then each one of my levels, my highest level would get 3 points, my middle level 2 points, and the lowest level 1 or 0 points. Or you can make this as high as you want. You know, maybe the best level is 10 points, and then 5 and 0 for the lowest level. It's whatever you want it to be, but you decide what those numbers are. That is opposed to the scale range, which is where you would give the grader a chance to assign a score still within a certain range that you assign them. So I kind of think of this as like a plus or minus when you're assigning grades. So let's say the greatest column or your exceeds expectation column, you're going to allow the grader to do 8 to 10 points and they can decide. Well, if that was an A plus, then they would assign 10 points. If it was just an A, 9 points. But it's still an A, but it's on the lower end, like an A minus, then you could assign 8 points there. But it gives your evaluator a little bit more wiggle room to decide where that student falls within a single evaluation range. So I'm just going to leave this as points just for this demo, and we'll just create the rubric. So again, we've got all of our title information up here that we've already put in. And then we see immediately that we've got 3 columns here. So I'm going to say our best column, because this is under the green, I'm going to say this is the awesome column. And then our middle scale will say the cookie was just okay, not great, but it's okay. And then lastly, we're going to say that cookie was not good, it was actually a throwaway. We would not eat that cookie. It's not worth the calories. So those are going to be the 3 levels that I'm using to describe each dimension of my cookie. And just to be simple, I'm going to say my point value is 3, 2, and then 1. But you could certainly do that throwaway as a 0 as well. So that's the first thing I would set up as your columns, how you're going to assess the different performance levels. And that can be whatever you want it to be. Again, I told you we use a lot exceeds expectations, so this would be the first one. Maybe meets expectations and then does not meet expectations. But however you want to do that, you've got some flexibility there, and you can always add more columns if you decide you need more. And then we need to look at our rows. So what are we actually going to be assessing? And you eat with your eyes first, right? So I'm going to put appearance as being the first thing to look at with our chocolate chip cookie. I think we also need to look at how soft it is and how chewy it is. And then since it's a chocolate chip cookie, we need to know that it has a good chocolate ratio, right? We've got enough chocolate chips, but not too many. And we might want to also add in size. So you can go as far down on these as you would like, but let's say we feel happy with those 5, but I'd already said that I wanted 8. Well, no problem. We just go and delete. Are you sure you want to delete? Yes. So now I'm just getting rid of those extra ones that I don't need anymore. But you're always able to go back if you would like. Say we think of another one, you can add another dimension, which would give you another row, or you can add another level if you would like to maybe add 4. But I'm going to get rid of that for now. We're just going to leave it at 3 columns here, 3 different levels. So the next thing I would recommend that you do is go ahead and add in your descriptors. And this is probably the best tip I could give you, is to write this one first, because this is going to be your best one. So describing the appearance, what would the perfect cookie look like for you? And you would write that one first. And then you would kind of scale that back a notch, and then scale that back even further for what would not be good with appearance. So some different ways that you could do this is just with different grading of words. For example, maybe this first one, not necessarily with the appearance, but maybe just with a presentation that a student was giving, you could say, in all instances, you were able to X, Y, Z, whatever it is. So this one would be all instances. Then your next one was in some instances, or in most instances, you were able to X, Y, Z. So you're borrowing that wording from the first, except you're just changing keywords. So the first one was in all instances, in most instances, and then never or rarely were you able to do X, Y, and Z. So just changing up that wording just a bit, but keeping the body of that descriptor the same will make it easy for you to write these 3 different levels of performance. Some other words that you might consider would be, for the highest one, maybe thorough or clear, very clear. And then your middle level might be, it was unclear. And then maybe your last level would be, it was missing. The student did not even include it at all in their assignment or in their presentation. So think about the different levels of those verbs that you can use. Okay, so that is filling out the descriptor. So you would go through and do each one of those. And then a couple of extra things that I think were really brilliant for ExamSoft to include in were categories. So just like you see with when you add in a question to your data bank, you can add in categories. So now we're assessing the same thing with the rubrics that we were assessing previously with our questions. So this is going to be great for accreditation. So you can add in categories or then delete those back out if you decide you don't want to use those. But I do highly recommend that you use categories for assessment purposes. And then the other thing I wanted to show you here is the weighting. So it's in this column. So let's say, to me, it's really, really important that that chocolate ratio is what it should be. So I'm going to double its weight. So now it's worth twice as much as the others. And then the other thing that's really important to me would be softness, because I hate a hard cookie. So I'm going to go ahead and increase its weight as well. And so ExamSoft does all those calculations for you in order to make that percentage add up to 100 down here. So then we would go ahead and save our rubric, because we want to then use it on an actual assessment. So it doesn't like my characters that I've added in for my different levels, so we'll just take that away and we'll try to save that again. Great, so now my rubric has been saved. So it takes a little while to create the rubrics, but you can reuse them over and over again. So now, while we're within the portal, I want to show you how easy it is just to put one of these on an actual assessment. So let's say it's going to be to assess a student's resume or their CV that they assign. So we would just go in and create a new assessment, except now instead of choosing just multiple choice questions from the question bank, we want to do a performance grading because we're looking to see how they actually did on their CV or on their resume. So again, we're going to give it a title. So we'll just put resume CV assignment. And then it was a writing assignment. We'll keep it in my rubrics folder. And then we just want to add the rubric to it. And there's the one that we created today, and we'll just add it into our assessment. You can also preview these to make sure that it's the one that you're actually wanting, and that's the one that we worked on today. So we'll add it to our assessment and then close this box, and now we have added this item or this rubric to our assignment. So now, oh, again, it doesn't like my characters. We'll just leave it in like that. So now we have this assignment that we're saving. And now we're going to get ready to post it. And I think there's some really cool features when it comes to posting the rubric that I wanted to show you. So this looks similar as far as putting in dates, just like it would when you're creating an exam. So you would put in what course you want it to go to and put in your dates. I'll just say tomorrow. But then there's a lot of things that you can release to students in addition to the rubric. So I want to show you down here, you can choose to pre-release the rubric. So you would choose which rubric you want to use. We'll use the one we created today. And we'll go ahead and release it to our students today, right now, so that they can know this is how we're going to evaluate their work. That way, again, it'll increase the quality of their work because they know how they're going to be assigned. So pre-releasing, I think, is really important so they can see how they'll be evaluated. But in addition to that, you can send instructions with that rubric. So you can remind them, here are the due dates, here's the type of file you need to upload, and give them some of the details of the instructions that go with your assignment. And then this is where we would require that they upload an answer file. And I'm going to say here it's an actual file because they need to upload their CV. And we would either allow them to do multiple files or they can only do one at a time. And if you want to allow them to revise it, up until the deadline, you can do that here as well. But when we make these choices on these options, that's going to send emails to the students so that they are aware of the rubrics and the instructions and all the deadlines. So I think that's a really nice feature that's going to come with the assignment. So that is what the portal looks like. And so hopefully, even though it was a silly little topic there of creating a rubric with a cookie, I hope it shows you just how simple it really is to use the rubrics function within ExamSoft. So now that we've looked at it, I want to go through just a couple of best practices when it comes to rubrics. And the first one is KISS. That's the way you can remember it. Keep it short and simple, especially when you're having students evaluate each other's work. You don't want to have 30 different rows on that rubric. You want to keep it to just what you're really wanting to evaluate. And then I highly recommend that you get students to help you create the rubrics because that's going to be beneficial for them, and it's also going to get them involved in the process and really feel like they had a part of it. So sometimes when I do a rubric, like with the essay question, for example, the next day in class, I'll ask students, what do you think should have been included on the rubric? What are some things that we should be looking for and should be included in every single essay question? And that gets some really great discussion going on in class because then they are splitting those hairs again to try to figure out what the best answer was. So there's learning that happens in that process. So if possible, you can get the students to help you create your rubric. The next best practice would be to keep each one of those items really distinct and measurable. So make sure you're only measuring one thing for each of those items. Don't put appearance and taste, for example, into one, because then you're not getting a good picture of which one the cookie did not meet. So keep them distinct and make sure they're measurable. So this is similar to writing up learning objectives when you're teaching in a course. It wouldn't be good to say a student showed understanding of this article. Well, what does that mean, that they showed that they understood it? That's not really measurable. But if you say the student identified 3 key points from this article, then that would be something that is measurable and helps to show that they've understood the article. So be sure that the wording that you're using is measurable. Next, we have to distribute that rubric at the beginning of the assignment. So once you introduce it in class, go ahead and show them how you plan on evaluating them, because that'll improve the quality of their work. And then make sure that when you're using rubrics for peer assessment, that you're assessing them in a timely manner. So don't have the students turn in a rubric and then 2 weeks later you open up the peer grading for it. There's too much time that's elapsed there. So as soon as they turn it in, try to make the assignment for the peer grading right after that. And then train the students how to use a rubric. They might not have ever used one before, seen one before. So teach them really how to go in and grade and how to evaluate work based on the rubric. And then lastly, modify your course. Modify how you're teaching based on the results of your rubric. So using those categories, maybe you can tell the students didn't perform as well in one area as you thought they should have. So once you see that, modify your teaching based on that later so that you're improving your teaching using the feedback that you're getting from this assessment tool. So now we will finish with what are some of the lessons that I've learned from using rubrics, and I'm going to do two different lists for you. We'll have a to-do list and a not to-do list. So starting off for our to-do list is I would teach students how to upload assignments, because this is a little bit different. So if we were doing like the resume or CV assignment where they actually have to turn in something, they will do that on the website portal. And so they'll need to know how to do that. It's not going to go through soft test, what they're used to using when they're taking exams, but it's a little bit different. So I would show them an example of this in class, but also provide a step-by-step handout so that they can walk themselves through the process when they get home and it's time to submit their assignment. I would also require that students upload their documents as a PDF. And we did run into a little bit of trouble with this because some documents did not want to open well on like iPads or different devices that the students were on. But we found that if you uploaded as a PDF, the PDF always opened, no matter what the device was. So we require now that students upload all of their files as PDFs and not as Word documents. Next, I recommend that you perform the peer assessments while they're actually in class, at least for the first time, so that they can have you there to help them if there's some sort of glitch and they don't know where to go next, but you would have some people in the room to help them. And what I recommend is that you go ahead and train a few faculty. Maybe it's other faculty that teach in the course, and even some upperclassmen who have done this before, or students in that class that you just train beforehand so that they know how the program works and they can help you in a classroom to answer questions as students have them. So if you perform the assessment in class, I would get some other people that you've trained that can help you answer questions during that time. And next, I recommend that you display the rubric like on the screen of the room, because sometimes, depending on what device they're using, the different descriptors will be collapsed. Now, you can hover over each of those descriptors and be able to read the full version, but it's nice if you have the rubric maybe on the screen of the room or even print it out for the students so that they can quickly go through and mark their answer choices. The next thing I recommend doing is to upload documents for non-responders. And what I mean by that is maybe there's students who didn't turn in the assignment. And then you're going to go in and randomize the group so that the students are grading another person's assessment. Well, if they happen to be randomized to a student who did not upload a file, then they don't get the advantage of the peer assessment. They're not able to assess a work because they just get a blank document. So I recommend that you would go in and upload some sort of document for them so that they at least get the added value of doing this peer assessment for themselves. And again, there's usually not many non-responders, but just be aware because you can look, excuse me, you can look and track how many students have turned in their documents, and then before you do the peer grading assignment, you can go through and upload a document for those who didn't respond. And then lastly, I always try to have students reflect on the process. What did they learn? To really prove to them the value of learning that was happening as they were assessing another person's work. So have them reflect on, what did they learn from the other students' work that maybe they hadn't included in their work, so that they're constantly thinking about how they can improve and move forward with lifelong learning. So that was the to-do list, and here is the not to-do list, the things that we learned the hard way. Is don't start this process within a week of your first due date. It takes a little while to get in and create the rubrics and just make sure that you understand the process. So I would start this well in advance of when your first assignment is due. And we can make all of our peer grading anonymous. So even on the CV or the resume assignment, we have the students put in fake names and addresses. So we didn't think about telling the students not to name their file with their name in it, because that sort of gave it away. So be sure that you just remind them not to put their name on the file name, because that will show up if the students download the document when they're grading it. You can see the title of the file. So just something to be aware of. The other thing is, do not assume that your Wi-Fi connectivity for your room will be able to hold all of the students that you have. I would try to test that out before you come in and have 100+ students doing the same thing on Wi-Fi. And then also would not trust that all students will bring their devices as you instruct them to do. Always have a backup method ready. Maybe it's some extra laptops or iPads, or maybe you do this in a computer lab, because students sometimes forget to bring their device if you're wanting them to use it in the classroom. And then I also would not assume that students know how to use a rubric. You would think they would, but this might be the first time they've seen it. So just teach them how to use it, and then teach them how to use the functionality within ExamSoft. And then the last thing is, don't rely on students to give honest feedback of their peers if it's a graded assignment, because sometimes they will go through and just say, yes, they did all of these things, even though they really didn't, in order for the students, for their peers not to get a bad grade on the assignment. So maybe some of this peer grading is just completion. If they do the peer grading, then they receive points for that, so that you're able to get a little bit more honest feedback from that peer group. So those are some of our not to-dos that we learned in the process. So just to review, I wanted us to look at our session learning objectives and see if we covered each one of these. I hope that I've proved to you the value of using assessment and peer assessment as a teaching method. We compared those functions of to-do and not to-dos. And then I hope that now you are making that list of possible assignments that you can use in your course to get students to learn from each other as they're doing this peer grading. So your next steps, if you are interested in this and want to try out rubrics, I would recommend you talk to your account manager today. ExamSoft will do a pilot period for you, so if you're interested in just testing it out and seeing how it goes, ask your account manager for more information on that. I'd like to close with this quote. There is a drawback to using rubrics, because students will want to have rubrics for everything they learn. Once you start using them, students really see the value in them. So even though it takes a lot of time, the return on your investment is really great when you see the student learning that's going to happen. So here are some references that I've used, and there are plenty of references online available to you. So feel free to check those out when you're trying to make some rubrics of your own. So with that, I will close, and I'm happy to take some questions from the audience about the use of rubrics.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was a wonderful presentation. As Ashley suggested, we're going to go ahead and open up the forum for a brief Q&A period. So if you do have questions for Ashley, now is the time to type them into the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. We already have a couple in the queue, Ashley, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in.
Great.
The first is, if you have a 10-question essay exam, do you need to create a specific rubric for each question?
Okay, so that's a good question. Do you need to do separate rubrics for each question? And I think it depends on what you're testing. You know, it is possible to make some very general rubrics that do not have anything that would be item specific. So for instance, you know, the student was able to identify the issue, or the student was able to address the problem, the student was able to XYZ, whatever it is, those are general and would not necessarily be tied to a certain question. But for accreditation purposes, if you're wanting to really monitor and assess how they're doing in specific areas on specific disease states, then maybe you would want to go in and make some specific rubrics. So that will be a lot more time and more work to do, but it is possible just to create a very broad type of rubric and use that for different items. That's really just focusing on the knowledge and maybe even the grammatical errors that would be in the essay, or how clear their presentation of their argument is. And that's what I would recommend, because that will be much more simple, and you're able to do just a general type rubric and use that for multiple responses.
Wonderful. Next question is, how is your program selecting categories for your rubric?
Okay, so we are choosing categories for the rubrics just as what's specific to that course. So the things that I would be thinking about are maybe accreditation purposes, whatever type of program you're in and their standards, to try to use things that are similar to what you're doing with your normal questions. So maybe it's disease state, maybe it's professionalism, but whatever you're assessing on your multiple choice exams, it might be possible just to assess those on the rubric as well. So that's where I would start. And then maybe think of some course-specific type categories that you would want to add in. Because the really great thing about using rubrics here, and I didn't show this when we were inside the portal, is that you can save a template or template for any type of rubric. So let's say it's like, as we talked about before, it's just a general rubric on a response to an essay question. You could save that just as a template, and then for individual courses where you would maybe want to add in some specifics, you can open up a copy of one of those and save it as a new rubric, but then tag different categories to it and maybe change some of that wording in your descriptors. But you're still keeping that body or that template there that you can just adapt each time. So, because your categories might be different based on what course you're in or what you're actually assessing. So that would be my recommendation for categories, is try to go ahead and assess what you're already assessing on your multiple choice type questions, and then think if there's anything extra that you would want to do maybe for that course or for that content specifically.
Great, and we have a follow-up question, Ashley. Is there a way to run a report on category understanding from a rubric?
Yes, there is, and that's going to be some really valuable information for you as you're changing your teaching. But there is the same type of reporting that you can do with multiple choice type questions. You can run for these as well. You can even release that to students in a report card, similar to how you do to multiple choice type questions. So that's a really powerful tool to give your program some feedback, but also to give your students feedback.
Great. Next question is, can you touch on more advantages of pre-releasing a rubric?
Yeah, so just some advantages that I see of pre-releasing a rubric is really because you're going to get a better quality work from the student. So let's say it is that CV or resume assignment, and we go ahead and release the rubric. We're going to show the students what we're looking for. We're looking to see that you have included X, Y, and Z as categories. We're also looking for grammar. We're looking for your references to be up to date and that you've included this type of experience from school. Whatever it is, they're already going to know what's required of them and what the expectations are. So as they're doing their assignment, they already know how they'll be evaluated, and they can make sure that their assignment is already meeting those objectives before they even submit it.
Great. Next question is, can you speak to connecting the grade from this to an LMS such as Canvas?
Oh, I cannot speak to Canvas, and I'm not sure about that. We are integrated with Blackboard, and again, as far as I can tell, Canvas wouldn't be any different, but Stephanie, please interrupt if that is different. But I believe you can transfer these grades over to an LMS just like you would if you're already integrated with your system. If not, you can post the scores just within the portal and even release those report cards like I mentioned to you with the category use to the student portal as well. Stephanie, do you know anything more about that and integration with Canvas?
No, you're exactly right, Ashley. It's the same type of integration with Blackboard and Canvas. It pushes just as it would from a multiple choice traditional type of formative assessment over to your LMS, exactly the same.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next question is, coming from a health sciences education setting, what are some student peer evaluation assignments you would recommend?
Well, I would recommend the ones that I've put in here, just in general, on different assignments that you have. But another thing I didn't touch on that I think is really great, especially in health professions, is peer assessment of group work. So whether it's team-based learning or any type of group project that you might have students working on, it is beneficial that they assess their team members and they get that feedback from their peers on how they're performing as a group, how they're communicating as a group, and if they're pulling their own weight with the project. And so in addition to the list that I gave, I would add peer evaluations are really, really great. And that's not just for health professions either, but it would be an easy way to use rubrics. But again, you're giving the students the experience of evaluating someone else's performance and then providing good, constructive feedback to help them improve. So any type of assignment that you do as a group and you want to get some peer feedback from, I would consider using rubrics for that.
Awesome. We have time for one more question. If you have posed questions and we haven't gotten to you, no fears. We'll get back to you via email, either ExamSoft or Ashley will directly. But last question is technical questions. What is the difference between rubric template and a rubric?
Okay, so I think the difference here would be that the template is going to be one that you can reuse over and over again. So you can start with that and then maybe tweak and adapt and then save that version of the template. So to me, it would be like within Word, you're starting with something, but then you can save as another. And that way you're taking your base of the template, maybe it's just the really general one that you're using. You have a starting point, but then you can make those little tweaks and changes to adapt it to your assignment and then save that work. So you're keeping the original template, but now you've got your adapted changes as a second document that then you can use as well. So it's just a way to save you some time if you're creating lots of rubrics that are very similar to each other.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your answers and your presentation today, Ashley. Thank you all for taking time out of what I know is a very busy time of year for you. We appreciate you being here. If you have questions, Ashley's contact information is listed on the screen. If you have questions for ExamSoft, we can be reached at